This is the process in fitting a tensator spring to the idler barrel, the take-up barrel. Here we have the clamping wedge and the spring, and the process is relatively simple, even with a strong spring, in that it is clipped onto the barrel. You can see the locating strings line up, and the wedge is placed on the spring. And the wedge is clamped in place. Check the alignments. To make sure that the spring is correctly related to the barrel, and then we do a final tightening of the wedge. So it gives us the clamp in place, and then all that happens is the spring is transferred from the coil as supplied to the take-up barrel, the storage barrel. This is continued until the complete spring is on the storage barrel. Once the spring is wound onto the storage barrel, you'll find that the tail end of the spring is very tightly coiled against the rest of the spring, and when we have to attach it to the take-up barrel, what happens is we've got to put a counter bend or a reverse bend into the spring. And when you think about attaching the wedge and trying to hold the spring that wants to tightly coil against itself in the opposite direction, I suspect that it's going to be relatively difficult to actually put this spring clamp on and tighten it. So what I'm doing is I've made a bending jig where we clamp the tail end of the spring to a form, and we actually pre-bend it in the opposite direction. So we put a reverse bend in the way that we find it going to clamp the spring, and this should make the fitting of the spring very much simpler. And then for a further bend, I'm going to slide it on. Now, you might say it's going to affect the performance of the spring, but what is happening in our case is that we have we're only using 24 of the available 27 turns. So this section of spring is permanently clamped to the drum. It's never unwound at all, it remains permanently curved. So this reverse bend will have nothing to do with the performance of the spring or the amount of drive available to the clock. It's just going to make assembly very, very much easier. So there we have our pre-bend or pre-form in our spring. So when we come to attach the spring to the barrel, we should have far less problems than trying to coil up a stubborn spring that wants to remain coiled in the opposite direction. This is the first start of the assembly of the main frames. The basic pillar uprights are very simple to assemble. They need no special instruction. It's just screws and on the frame and so forth. The same with the state of wind indicator. It is just straight screw assembly. The brackets for the winding clicks. One point to notice is on the state of wind wheel there is a small center mark that needs to line up with the equivalent mark on the notch on the Geneva wheel. This ensures that the lock pin is in the correct place. Otherwise there's nothing unusual or complicated about assembling these parts. Each shatong and so forth, where necessary, is numbered, as also there are identification numbers at the bottom end and everywhere on the frame assembly, so we know exactly which upright goes on which section of the frame. The first stage in assembling the main frames is the main horizontal section, marked 2 and 1, also marked underneath 1 and 2, so we know it goes this way around, and it's placed over the guide pins and tapped down. The next stage of assembly is the secondary pillar bases are fitted, numbered 1 and 1, so they are in place. Then as they are in place, it is the main uprights. Number 2. And that completes the main frame sections. These sections are held in place by screws inserted through the base, and that clamps these units from there to there together. The lower frame assembly is the same. It's easier to place the upper rail on the horizontal section and then insert the guide pins. Everything again is numbered. It's 44, 44. They are orientated, of course. There's clearance in the back section for the state of wind indicator mechanism. Once they are in place, the vertical frames can be fitted. And then the mounting screws inserted. The next stage is to fit the cam locks. The reason being is that these are under a lot of tension. They lock the whole plate together, but because we had this screw holding the main frames together, there wasn't sufficient thread left to have a decent sized head on the screw and yet to still have sufficient clamping force. We numbered again number 4 and number 4, and then this is also numbered 4, and it is inserted and tightened. And it should be perfectly vertical. Same to number 3. It's important to orientate the numbers correctly, as the clamp also has to end up tight and vertical. It must be noted also that these are the only two items that hold the whole set of frames together. The front frames are also assembled in exactly the same way. To fit the side frames, the side member is simply placed over the square clamp. It's inserted, the dowel pin holes are lined up with the frame, and it is tapped on. What I've done is I slacken off the screws that hold the main frames together are slackened off, so if there's any adjustment required as we insert, this is enabled. And then finally, what is done is the locking eccentric screw is inserted into this hole, rotated until it's fully home, and clamped up. We do this with some force as it is holding the whole frame together, and actually this is all that holds the front and the back frame together as far as the brass frame is concerned. It is a reason why I have a preference for a hidden steel subframe. We'll speak about this more later. So once that's in place, we can tighten up the base screws, and we will leave these screws slack until we've placed the second half of the frame together. Now the next stage will be to actually assemble the spring barrels. So that is the front frame as a unit, and the rear frame will follow shortly. An important thing to remember is that this is the time to insert the state of wind indicator sectors, as it's not easy to do once the winding barrels are in place. So they are now installed, and we can proceed to fit the winding barrels. The next stage in assembly is to install the winding barrels. It is important to install the first time train barrel and the strike barrel, because they have the great wheels that are in the front position, and the other two barrels are installed second. Then the rear frame is pushed up from the back. The barrels are lifted in, and finally the eccentric straps are fitted, which clamps the whole unit together. This is the procedure to install the rear frame. It's a little interesting, but it's has to be done. So, yes, we gently move it up towards the winding arbors. Checking for clearance all the time. In fact, what we can do is we can slide back the arbors. Because we have the long extension at the front. Now we can get the eccentric clamps between the frames together. at this stage that I recall the curve frames, and one can imagine the difficulty in installing these arbors plus another 4 time trains simultaneously on frames that weigh considerably more. To install the spring, the winding barrel must be against the stop. Then the loose end of the spring is extended to a point that the wedge with the screws can be installed on the spring end, which is then brought out of the barrel to the point where the screws are screwed home and anchoring the spring properly. You can see the wedge is totally flush with the barrel, and the spring exits the constant radius to the drum, and when released, before it reaches the unwound position, the stopwork comes into play. This video shows how free the main arbor is when we have here a spring under full tension trying to drive this barrel. It's up against the stopwork, so this barrel is being pulled that way, but in spite of that this arbor is this free, which goes to show that having the take-up barrel on the opposite side main arbor has very little effect on the freedom, on the drive that would eventually come from this clock when we connect the spring on here. The other interesting thing is when we wind the spring, if I just this as the hold this as the clock would, that's how we wind from the second idler barrel onto the main barrel. So you can see the one operates off the other, and again that is running central through. So what we have on each arbor is we have a loose idler drum, a spring drum that is attached to the stopwork, and then in the center we have a third arbor which is attached to the front barrel that goes through the maintaining power, and on the rear we have a ratchet wheel that prevents the clock from unwinding. So we have 3 different arbors running through the center, or I should say an arbor and then a sleeve going through the center of the take-up barrel for this side and attached to the stopwork. So this barrel is attached to the stopwork here. This one runs on a tube outside this section, and through the center of the whole lot is the main arbor.